Turning now to a power couple who really needs no introduction. That would be Amal and her husband, George, as in Clooney. 8 years ago, Hollywood royalty George married Amal, a powerhouse attorney, fighting for social justice. Together, back in 2016, they founded the Clooney Foundation for Justice. It's an organization that provides free legal support to victims of abuses of power. Tomorrow, they are hosting the first ever Albie Awards. It's a new ceremony to shine a light on individuals who are devoting their lives to justice at great personal risk to themselves. Now, this is going to be a star-studded affair. Listen to the presenters: Meryl Streep, Dua Lipa, Oscar Isaac, Julia Roberts, and Michelle Obama. In an exclusive interview, the couple joined us in the studio just yesterday to tell us all about it. Justice Albie Sachs, tell us about him and why this is why you wanted to call it the Albie Awards.
Albie Sachs is a South African lawyer who is a human rights hero. He fought against apartheid, and he was actually imprisoned, and then he was blown up in a car bomb. He lost his arm. He lost sight in one eye, but he never stopped fighting. And when Nelson Mandela got released from prison, he appointed Albie to the Constitutional Court, where he served as a judge for many years. He was one of the people who drafted the Bill of Rights in South Africa. And when we were thinking of who should win the Lifetime Achievement Award and who we wanted to name the entire ceremony after, he was the first name to come to mind, and we can't imagine anyone better.
George, I've heard you say you want to make sure that the people in cases are not forgotten. So a lot of times it's in the news and then it moves on.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you're determined not to let that happen.
It's a hard thing to do, listen, our news cycles are interesting. We have 24-hour news cycles, and quite honestly, the stories, get old. You've heard it, we've seen it, we know it.
Or you get fatigued.
You can see this happening in Ukraine right now, right? Now, here's the truth. In Ukraine, at some point, this war will end, at some point. And then there are going to have to be people held accountable for that. Part of what we're doing is gathering the evidence so that when that moment comes, you have the ability to say, now we're going to hold you responsible.
How did you all decide the award categories?
Well, it's basically matching the communities who we try to help through our work. So women, journalists, democracy defenders, survivors of human rights abuses.
And this group, Vyazna, are really fighting for free and fair elections. And I think 6 of them are in jail now, I think, in prison now. The wife of one of them is coming. And we're going to leave an empty chair for him. And she's bringing a letter from prison that he's going to read. These are people that willingly go to prison because they believe so strongly in the fight for independence and the fight for democracy. They are real heroes.
One of the awardees is Maria Ressa, and you represent her. Tell us a little bit about her.
Maria is an amazing journalist. She reported on what was happening in her country, corruption and the execution of civilians in the name of a drug war. The authorities came after her, and she's now facing 70 years in prison.
It used to be, naming and shaming people would force them to behave. That no longer appears to be the case.
It doesn't work. It really doesn't work. I tell you, there is an effective tool, though, which is, you can't shame Omar al-Bashir in Darfur in the Sudan. Right? You can't shame him.
So, George, do you call people on the phone and try to reason with them at first? What do you do? How does it work?
Well, I've had moments with heads of banks where I'll say, so we have forensic accountants, and they'll say, okay, well, what we found is you have Salva Kiir or Riek Machar or somebody from South Sudan, any number of sort of bad actors that have hundreds of millions of dollars in your bank, and I'm going to do a press conference tomorrow, and we've given all this.
With your George Clooney face.
Yes, and we've also given all this information to the Treasury Department, so that there are things that can be done.
It's been said about you, Mrs. Clooney, that you won't back down and you don't give up. Where does that fight come from for you?
Goodness, I don't know. I think we're just responding to what we see in the world and try to use anger as a motivating force rather than something that just makes you want to bury your head in the sand. I also think, my mum is a journalist, and she was always asking tough questions and not sort of intimidated by people who are in power, but, impressed if someone's actually doing something good, and I think that has stayed with me, and I think that's something that you and your father
we're both
shared
kids
as
of
well.
journalists.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you ever have advice from your dad, George?
Sure.
I like him so much, too,
He's
by the
fun.
way.
He's very smart and very
Fantastic.
funny. And, you know, listen.
And I know you're very close to
I took him to Darfur with me. We went into Chad and snuck into Darfur together when he was 75 years old. And he's a tough one. You know, when I was growing up, my dad had really one rule for us, which was challenge people with more power than you and defend people with less power. And he goes, if you do nothing else in your life, then you'll have had a successful life. And I remember my dad had done a story, I think about in Honduras, I think, and it was something sort of violent and awful. And the story got bumped for an Elizabeth Taylor, she got the big diamond ring story, right? And he was pissed off, of course. I said, let's go to Darfur, you and me. We'll go there, and you be the reporter, and I'll be Elizabeth Taylor, and we'll be the story.
I like that.
And that's you know, there are some things you can do. You know, we're not a government. We can't change the laws, but we can make it loud enough that the citizens can demand those type of things. And, you know, it doesn't work easily, and it takes a long time. And, you know, you keep feeling this, you know, this arc of history bending towards justice. It feels like it takes a long time. It does.
Yeah, George Clooney's dad, Nick Clooney, also a journalist. They're working very hard. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Amal and her husband, the lovely George. They're going to talk about raising their kids and what George did to win Amal's heart. He's clever, this George.